Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, my name is Brittany. I'm a mother to two little girls aged 6 and 3, and today I thought I would share my birth story of my almost 7-year-old actually. She turned 7 in June. So I wanted to just put this out there in case it gives any of you encouragement, or sometimes I just like looking at other birth vlogs to see what other moms experienced, and also for me so that I can look back on it and remember this special day. Like I said, it was 7 years ago, so almost 7 years ago. And so it's gonna be not as detailed probably if it was more recent, but thankfully a few years after her birth, I did have a blog. So I wrote the details in my blog. So I might be referencing that just to refresh my memory. So just a little background on like my pregnancy and stuff leading up to the birth. I'm a type 1 diabetic, and before I got pregnant, I was diagnosed in 2011. She was born in 2013. So I had only been a diabetic for 2 years. I was diagnosed in my adulthood at the age of 22. So it was all new for me. It was totally, it totally changed my life. So on top of being newly diabetic and pregnant, it kind of threw me for a loop. And so my first pregnancy and my second pregnancy were very different, but I'll get into my second pregnancy on a different video. So with Isabella, I got pregnant in 3 months. So it didn't take us very long to get pregnant. My pregnancy was pretty easy. I didn't have any issues, didn't have any complications. My blood sugars were good. My A1C was good. And yeah, there was really no complaints about my pregnancy at all with being diabetic. However, since I was diabetic, I had to see the doctor every week. And then once I hit 28 weeks, I had to have NSTs, which is the non-stress test, 2 times a week. So that was kind of difficult, working and then having to make the drive to the hospital 2, sometimes 3 times a week for my doctor's appointment and then the NSTs. But I made it work. It was all worth it. I'm glad they put those extra precautions there so that, we made sure that the baby was okay. There was never any issues. But like I said, being diabetic, they wanted to induce me at 39 weeks just to make sure the baby wasn't going to be too big. And I think this is pretty protocol for diabetics, to not let you go the whole 40 weeks just because there is that risk of the baby being too big. So I think like around 37 weeks when they started checking me, I was like 1 centimeter, 2 centimeters maybe. And then the next week they checked me at 38 weeks, and I think I was 2 or 3. I don't think I had progressed much, but that's when I made my appointment to be induced, which was, my induction was scheduled for June 30th. My original due date was July 7th, but then my induction was scheduled for June 30th. So on June 29th, I woke up that morning and I felt kind of like gas pains. They were not painful at all, but just kind of, that felt gassy. And my in-laws were here, and my mother-in-law could tell I wasn't feeling normal. I wasn't feeling right. And so she asked me, she's like, "How are you feeling?" And I told her, I'm like, "Well, I feel kind of gassy." I wasn't sure what it was. And she's like, "You might want to watch those because they might be contractions." And I was like, "No, there's no way. These aren't contractions." When I pictured contractions, I pictured them being very painful and very take your breath away kind of a thing. So at first I was like, there is no way these are contractions. But she just reminded me, watch them. And if they start getting closer, if they start becoming more frequent, let's start timing them. So she put that in my head, and we went about the day as normal. My husband and father-in-law and brother-in-law went, I don't even know where they went. They went and ran errands or something. And then us girls went to go get our nails done in the afternoon. And people think I'm crazy for still going to get my nails done when actually I was in labor. But like I said, it wasn't painful. So I remember sitting in the nail salon. I was getting a pedicure, And like I was timing them and they were coming every 15 minutes. So I'm like, well, maybe this is the real thing. You know, this was my first pregnancy, my first birth. I didn't know what to expect, but I was timing them and they were, I think, like 30 to 45 seconds long and 15 minutes apart. So they weren't too painful, but you know, it was getting a little uncomfortable. So I remember sitting in the pedicure chair and I would get one and like kind of tense up. And even my lady, I still go to her today, 7 years later. I remember her asking me, are you okay? Are you in labor? And I was like, no, I'm fine. I'm fine. Try to totally play it off. So we did that. We came home and my mother-in-law asked, you know, how I was doing. And I was like, I'm fine. You know, I didn't think it was going to happen, honestly. And I think I was probably in denial. But then she was like, okay, well, let's get ready. Let's prepare ourselves so that we are ready. And I think by this time, my contractions were about 10 minutes apart. And I think about 45 seconds long. So they were getting up there. It was definitely progressing. So I was like, okay, first, you know, let's take this slow, because I remember my doctor saying, don't come to the hospital until your contractions are about 5 minutes apart and are in length of, or they last from a minute to a minute and 30 seconds. So I didn't want to go too early because the hospital is like 30 minutes away. So I didn't want to get there and then have them send me home. So I was like, okay, let me get ready. Let me shower. I did my hair. I did my makeup. Like I made sure I had everything. And by the time that was done, they were about 7 minutes apart. So I was like, okay, fine, we can go. Let's just do this, you know? So, and I will never forget this. The last thing I had before I had her was, this is so bad, especially being a diabetic, but my cravings were real. A donut and a glass of milk. Terrible, I know, but sometimes you just can't help those cravings. So that was my last meal. I had it in the car on the way to the hospital. So we get to the hospital and I didn't have to wait long to be seen in triage. They put me back in triage, and in order to be admitted, you have to be 4 centimeters dilated. So the nurse, you know, hooked me up to monitors and wanted to check me to see how far I was progressed. And thankfully I was 4 centimeters. So that's when I knew it was real. They were admitting me and stuff was going to happen. I was going to be having a baby. And so it didn't take long for them to get me into my room. And it was funny because the room that they put me in was called the Princess Suite because it was huge. And I just remember thinking, how did they know this girl is going to be a princess? Like, this is perfect. This is her room. But it was nice having a big room like that because we had so many people. I had my mother-in-law, my best friend was taking my pictures for me, my birth pictures, and then I'll post some of them here. And then my husband, my father-in-law, my brother-in-law, everyone was in the room. Not while I gave birth, but you know, during the labor and stuff. So they got me in my room, and first thing I said was, I want my epidural. Like, honestly, my contractions weren't that bad, but I was so scared of the pain I was going to be in and possibly not being able to get an epidural that I just asked for one immediately because I didn't want to be in that situation. I'm terrible with pain, and I knew I wanted an epidural, so there was no waiting for me. So thankfully they were able to get me an epidural pretty quickly. So I feel like my laboring wasn't even that bad. It wasn't even that painful. I felt like it was a breeze compared to, you know, some of the stories you hear from other moms about their labor experience. So I got my epidural, and then couldn't feel anything, couldn't feel my legs. And, you know, they had to give me some Pitocin because sometimes an epidural can kind of slow down your contractions. So they gave me some Pitocin to keep them steady and keep them progressing. And then around 9 o'clock, I remember 9 o'clock at night, we got to the hospital about 5. So this is about 4 hours in. I remember telling my husband, I think I peed myself. Like, was that my water breaking? Because I couldn't feel anything, but it felt like I had peed myself. But I didn't know because, first of all, I couldn't feel anything, and then I had no control. So I didn't know if I could pee myself or not. So the nurse did come in and check me, and she said, yes, sure enough, my water had broke. So after my water broke, they just kept checking me and making sure that I was progressing. And sure enough, I think maybe an hour later, they checked me and I was 10 centimeters. So they kicked everyone out and started practicing pushing. And we all know what that is. I was like, are we really practicing or are we really doing this? So, you know, I was pushing and pushing, and the baby's heart rate was dropping with every push. So they had to give me some oxygen to help with her heart rate. And for some reason, she just wasn't moving. She was just kind of stuck in the birth canal. So then the doctor was like, well, if she's not coming out, we're gonna have to try a vacuum. And I was like, a what? You're not gonna take my baby out by a vacuum. So I like gave it all I had and was able to push her out. So I was pushing for about 45 minutes. So I was pretty tired, but I was like, I am not gonna let this doctor pull my baby out with a vacuum. I know I can do it myself. And so, like I said, I gave it all I had. I was able to push her out. No problems. They whisked her away right away. They didn't even put her on my chest, just because being diabetic, there's so many things that can happen with the baby after they're born that they want to check them right away before giving them to the mom to make sure that everything is okay. So immediately I panicked because I had not taken any birthing classes or any kind of classes. So I wasn't even really sure what to expect. And no one, you know, informed me that I wasn't going to be able to hold my baby right away. So they took the baby. I told my husband, I said, go check on her, make sure she's okay, because she wasn't crying. So it had me, you know, worried, but then thankfully she did start crying. And I just started crying because as a first-time mom, and I'm sure a lot of you can relate, that once you hear that baby cry, it's like these floods of emotions, and being able to see your baby for the first time, and it's just overwhelming, the love that you have for this child that you didn't even know was possible. So they checked her out, everything was fine. I did have to have a few stitches just from some tears that I had while giving birth, but after that, they brought her over to me. She was born at 12:11 a.m. on June 30th, so she decided she wanted to make her own appearance on her own time, which is totally Bella right now, on her own schedule, but she wanted to make sure she made her own entrance. So she came at 12:11 a.m. on June 30th, right before I was supposed to be induced. I think I was supposed to go in at 6 a.m. on June 30th to be induced. So like I said, June 30th is her birthday. She was 7 pounds, 15 ounces, and 20 inches long. No health problems. Recovery with her was so easy. I spent one night in the hospital and was able to go home the next day. Like I said, she was fine. She passed all of her testing. Her bilirubin levels were a little bit high, but nothing to be concerned about, I guess. She didn't need any of the light blankets or light treatments or anything. And my sugars went back to normal like almost immediately. And if you're a diabetic, you know, typically that's what happens once you give birth. Usually your sugars go back to normal, because during that last trimester of pregnancy, my insulin needs were through the roof. I think they had tripled what my normal intake is. So I was very thankful that everything kind of leveled back out and was back to normal. We were able to take her home, no health problems, no issues with either of us, and it was so different than my second pregnancy. And like I said, I will do that in another video, but for right now, this is just Isabella Lynn, born on June 30th, 2013, weighing 7 pounds, 15 ounces.